right, we have a development in Venezuela that I want to highlight, even though I don't think this will take very long. Let's see the significance of it. So, I don't like to classify things as good or bad news when it comes to kind of trends in markets, especially the oil market. I think there's a lot of interdependence there. But Venezuela's PDVSA is shifting its oil ventures accounts to Russia's GazPromBank, according to the media. So this is from TASS, which is Russia's official news agency, similar to, for example, I think the AFP would be a comparable agency, or the China has the Xinhua news agency, for example. So this is almost as if it's officially announced by Russia. In fact, it says the top Russian news agency. So it's saying that Venezuela's state-run oil company PDVSA is telling customers of its oil joint ventures to deposit sales proceeds at an account at Russia's GazPromBank, Reuters reports on Sunday, citing sources and internal documents. Reuters said PDVSA's move follows new U.S. financial sanctions imposed on January 28th and aimed at blocking President Nicolas Maduro's access to Venezuela's oil revenue. On January 23rd, Venezuelan National Assembly Speaker Juan Guaido proclaimed himself as the country's acting president. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has described it as a coup attempt and announced severing diplomatic relations with the United States. Guaido was recognized as interim president by the Lima Group countries, except for Mexico, as well as by Albania, Georgia, the United States, and the Organization of American States. Several EU countries came forward with support for the Venezuelan parliament and expressed hope for new elections to resolve the crisis. Maduro was supported by Russia, Bolivia, Iran, Cuba, Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Turkey. Belarus and China called for resolving all issues by peaceful means and spoke against any interference from the outside. The UN Secretary General called for dialogue to resolve the crisis. So I am not somebody who's going to pretend that this is a source for optimism. Some people would see this as a sign that Maduro is crumbling and his support is crumbling. It could be going that way, but you have to think about it in terms of how the mechanics are going. We're talking about the flow of capital, and the flow of capital is being impeded from Venezuela through, the U.S. sanctions. So in reality, Maduro is using one of the few financial avenues that he has left, which is to deposit Venezuela's oil ventures or deposit sales through Russia. Now, the fact is that some of the clients that or countries that are trading with Venezuela may say, well, it's not necessarily our desire to use GazPromBank. It might, for example, you have to factor in if there are fees and rates that would be amenable to some of these customers or depositors. So we're really talking about like Maduro trying to address the problem, and it could become a deeper situation for him in terms of keeping PDVSA afloat. PDVSA is already in horrible financial and structural shape now because of the outflow of qualified individuals from Venezuela. They simply, a career at PDVSA was once considered a way to be among the middle class to upper middle class in the country. And that's not true anymore because you can't necessarily earn enough to even subsist over there while working for PDVSA, which is, as stated, the state-run oil company. It's similar to basically, it's as if the United States would own an oil company, for example, and in the past we have had state-owned companies, particularly in services industries, not so much in real industrial, hard industries, heavy industries such as oil or iron ore. But it would be as if we would own an industry. We would own, for example, these oil rigs, but we wouldn't be able to sell the oil from those proceeds around the world. That's one of the pitfalls of having a state-owned company. That if the state has some sort of adverse relationship with another country, that relationship with the state-owned company would also be adversely impacted. So yes, Russia is offering Venezuela an escape route. It's per Russia's state interests, which I don't really begrudge Russia for doing, and also China as well would possibly extend such an olive branch to Venezuela in order to have them be able to do trade around the world. It could happen as well. I don't know if China is as committed in terms of their state investments in Venezuela as Russia is, because in the end, I think that I've seen cases where China is perfectly willing to uh, wipe the slate clean with a certain leader, such as in Zimbabwe. They ended up facilitating the removal of the Mugabe regime and put instead Emerson Mnangagwa. The fact of the matter is that little changed from one to the other. So those of you that are hoping for some sort of military coup in Venezuela, the real question is what will come out of that? Will Venezuela be able to re-enter the world stage as a country that is able to trade on an equal footing with other countries? And there's a paradox there. It's a paradox of reality. It's not really a moral issue if you're thinking about it. Many of you will say, well, we should just forgive all of Venezuela's debt. The fact of the matter is that China, Russia, Iran, and other countries have invested billions of dollars into Venezuela, and saying that they should forgive that debt kind of ignores really the way that money, capital, and real investments work. Okay, I'm speaking at a very basic level. So, supposing that Maduro were to be removed, there have been talks between Guaido and other, diplomatic emissaries from some of these countries that have supported the Venezuelan government, the Chavista government, where they have talked about the new Venezuelan government honoring those debts to those countries. So from the beginning, you're going to see Venezuela having to play catch up, having to kind of go through an austerity in order to actually accomplish that. Because really, the model that Maduro's government operated under of heavy state investment in the economy, of these misiones, all of these popular causes that would be used to improve the lives of the poor, those ran pretty well when the price of oil was pretty high, maybe about 10 years ago. That model was fine at the time. Then when the price of oil tanked and all of these other industries were already leaving Venezuela because it wasn't so practical for them to remain there, when in reality they were getting taxed higher, they weren't really able to, they were being regulated like crazy. So some of these companies simply began to end their operations in Venezuela. The upper class people were hoarding their resources, hoarding their income as well, and Venezuela's economy has been brought to a standstill. And then Chavez, and then Maduro both claimed that they had an economic war on their hands. Well, who started the economic war? They wanted to seize the means of production, and sometimes people don't want to give them up. And therefore, you have the crisis of today where they actually need Venezuela needs foreign help in order to stay afloat, just like a number of other countries have in the past. Their example isn't an exception. So you're going to see basically the people that are keeping him afloat are basically these countries that have a legitimate stake in the economy because Maduro needed them to come in to prop him up. So if you look at the graph over here, this is starting in 2012. Venezuela had an output of, it said, I don't know what the units are here, but these are this is the output of oil from all these countries. So in 2012, Saudi Arabia was at the top, Russia was second, the U.S. was third. Under the Obama administration, our oil output began to increase. So you can see from this shouldn't be as fast as it is, but let's go a little slower. So 2013, you see the U.S. starts to creep up. This is in part because of the fracking that Obama allowed. So then you go to 2014. You see there that the U.S. was almost at that time. Trump likes to brag that the U.S. is now the world's leading producer of oil, but at the time under Obama, he was already increasing the oil output. So those of you that are Green Democrats, you shouldn't really be fans of Obama. And those of you that are thinking, oh, Trump kind of fixed the oil industry, those are policies that have been in place for a while. So I don't really see this as a political football that should really be, um, you know, I personally am not a fan of the oil industry by any means. Now, you can see that Venezuela's oil output is also shrinking in the interim. So 2014, you see that Venezuela had sunk to 147 barrels after having 153 the previous year. So their output was already going down under the last years of Chavez. Then in 2015, the U.S. displaced Saudi Arabia as the world's top oil producer. This was still under President Obama. And then in 2016, Saudi Arabia dramatically increased their output. Venezuela's was by this time already kind of tanking. Now, 2017, this is the latest year that's available. Venezuela had tanked to 119. So this was basically a trend that has been going on for a while. What's Russia's interest in investing in Venezuela? I would say that it's pretty simple. Russia has they have a smaller economy than almost all of the states of Europe. You have, for example, Britain and even Italy, I think, are comparable sized economies. Germany would probably be still even larger, even greater than Russia's. But those economies do need mineral resources, okay? Especially Germany. Germany is pretty resource poor. I know they still have coal mines in kind of the rural region of Western Germany, if I'm not mistaken, the Rhineland. So essentially, they're dependent on foreign sources of oil in order to drive their economy. Russia, as long as they can keep the price of oil reasonably afloat, they can basically drive their economy basically from the petrodollar or the petro yuan as they're trying to develop now, and they're basically selling a lot of their oil to China. Now, who's another competitor for that oil output? Well, it'll be Venezuela. Fortunately for them, Venezuela has incompetently managed their oil industry since Maduro came to power, and well before that under Chavez. So there's a real problem here for Venezuela that they're depending in terms of their financial their financial stability on a country like Russia that in broad terms Russia doesn't have an interest in Venezuela's oil industry succeeding. To a certain extent, they have an interest in the oil industry failing. So it's almost like you're dependent on your own enemy to be successful. So in some ways, we have the same type of relationship with China. So I'm just making this observation. I don't know if the coup or whatever the hell you want to call this thing is going to make things better there. In a certain way, there's no one more than there's plenty of people more than me that would want Maduro to go. I certainly despise him. I think he's driven the country into ruin. But we have to keep in mind what's in the best interests of the people of that country, and how do we keep America from involving itself in a way that would damage our future, would put our troops in danger, and would probably cause other problems in Latin America. So that's about it. Please like, share, and subscribe the video. I'm going to kind of edit this down. There are a few bumpy spots in the middle. Also, please like this channel or subscribe to the channel on Cocoscope and on BitChute, especially on BitChute. And you can find me on all these other platforms behind me right here. And I'll talk to you guys later. Have a great Saturday night.